And then Bob, really happy to have you here from the Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy. So I wanted to get started by learning a little bit more about you, Stephanie, and REfficient. So if you wouldn't mind giving a little bit of an overview of who you are, what REfficient does, and then what your interest was in pursuing offsets, working towards carbon neutrality.
For sure. So, hi everyone. I am Steph McClarty, and I founded REfficient back in 2010. So we help telecom companies to divert their telecom products from waste. So basically, when one service provider upgrades their networks and they pull out their old equipment, we help them to resell it to other companies that can reuse it or recycle it, and we give sustainability reporting throughout. So we're founded on this whole principle that no technology should go to waste. If it can be reused, it should be. So we've always been super green and sustainable. We're part of Sustainable Hamilton Burlington. And I think it was just over 2 years ago, I really had this moment in my life where I became a mom and I realized, what am I doing to really protect the future for my daughter and her generation and just the planet itself? And so I was already, green and environmentally minded before, but then it just made me realize I can do so much more. So that's when we decided as a company that REfficient would be carbon neutral within 3 years. And why 3 years? Well, because why not? Because it felt like it was super ambitious. We didn't know how we were going to do it. But if anything, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that when there's a will, there's a way. And so we declared we're going to be carbon neutral within 3 years. We'd already reduced our carbon emissions a lot. And so for our first year, we decided to purchase carbon offsets, and we've purchased offsets in the Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy. So that's a bit about our story.
Awesome. No, that's great. I know you've done so much work before actually getting to the offset part, which is kind of, I think, the process that everyone likes to take, which is reduce it as much as you can. And then you kind of get to that point where it's like, okay, right now offsets are the only feasible option. So really exciting. And I think it's so great that you were able to buy offsets locally as well. I think that's wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Bob. And so we wanted to touch a little bit upon a couple areas of your life on the Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy. So looking forward to hearing a little bit more about where, your kind of career path took you, what the EBC does, and then a little bit more about how you deliver and actually implement the offset program. So just let me change the slides and let me know, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy, this trust that we got going in 1997. So you've got pictures here of some cliffs, Huron shoreline, lakes, Saugeen River. We worked through that whole area of Southern Ontario. Next.
Okay, just let me make sure that there we go.
Okay, so I thought since we're talking to students, it'd be kind of fun to give you a little bit of a bio. So when I was going to the U of T, I got heavily involved in the U of T outing club, and it was a big surprise. Actually, women went on these trips, and I ended up doing mostly white water, but hiking, caving, climbing, all these things. I ended up doing this every weekend. So after graduating from architecture, I got into management consulting for a few years, and then I went into architecture. And among my architectural projects were designing 1,000 beds of student residence at Sir Sandford and Niagara and Loyalist College, of course. So another thing that really got me going, I decided I didn't want to kill myself kayaking, going down waterfalls or whatever. So I started hiking the Bruce Trail with my kids between 84 and 86 when the kids were pretty young. So then I got heavily involved with the Bruce Trail. I got on their board, and I think I was on 7 committees at one time, meetings every night almost. But then in 1997, we decided to start the Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy so that we could expand beyond the scope of what the Bruce Trail was working on. Next one. So our focus areas, Niagara Escarpment, Manitoulin Island, which is all Niagara Escarpment again, the Huron shore, Saugeen watershed. So that's between the escarpment and the shore. Next. So around here, conservation started maybe just over 100 years ago. The Ontario Parks started up in 1893. And I just emphasize that the Ontario Parks here in Southern Ontario have only reached 1.5% of the land coverage of Southern Ontario. So it's very small. Lots up north, but south here it's not much. 1946, conservation authorities got going, and of course their funding's been pulled. Their regulatory authorities just recently been pulled. 1928, Ontario Nature. 68, Nature Conservancy. And then along we came 23 years ago, the Niagara Escarpment got protected with Escarpment Conservancy. So next one. So people sometimes say, you know, what's a nature reserve all about? Are these just pretty things? At any rate, we're trying to solve the world's problems here, and I'm going to talk about carbon sequestration. So if we can't solve our problems locally, we'll never solve them around the world. So these protected areas are areas that are sort of learning centers that we can watch, we can learn from them. They're providing guidance. Next one. So these purple arrows are properties that we've got protected, and the red ones are protected with agreements. So we own purple, and the red ones are agreements. So you see we've got quite a bit going on in Grey County and Bruce County and Manitoulin Island.
Just a quick question for you, Bob. How do you kind of decide as to what areas you're going to be interested in either pursuing or working with private companies? How is that kind of, like what makes or piques your interest in focusing on a specific area?
Well, we work by opportunity. I mean, if people come to me all the time from Eastern Ontario or something, and I have to say, well, go and talk to the land trust that's active over there. But more or less, it's not us studying the ecology of an area and saying, oh, this is where we have to create a nature reserve. It's almost always an opportunity. A landowner comes to us and we say, great, let's protect your land as you want us to. Next one. So far, the land trusts, there are something like 34 land trusts in the province, and they've protected over 100,000 acres. So not everybody thinks in acres. 400 square kilometers. So that's a pretty big area. It's been protected by our private land trusts. And I just emphasize that the provincial government, the federal government, and conservation authorities aren't really doing all that much. Really, it's the land trusts that are driving conservation in Ontario. So the governments talk, but they are not doing that much land conservation. We're really the major driving force right now. Next one. So we do have the Niagara Escarpment World Biosphere Reserve. It's one of 13 in Canada, one of 600 in all kinds of countries. But the Niagara Escarpment's a pretty important area. And the idea of a biosphere reserve is that the residents work together to balance development and ecological integrity. So it's not just the environment, and it's not just cultural things. It's supposed to be an area that's in balance, and they regularly check to make sure that the Niagara Escarpment is still in balance. Next one. So I just mentioned this example. We talked about opportunities before. This nice lady I met at an event, and she was telling me about the 100 acres that she has in Chesley. So we said, hey, that sounds pretty interesting. That's where we're working. So we got an appraisal. We got the approvals from Environment Canada. And the lawyers arranged the closing. All this taking usually about 9 months. It doesn't happen as fast as I'm saying it. But that property sequesters 1,100 tons of carbon dioxide every year. And it protects about $200,000 of these ecological services that I'll tell you more about in a second every year. So it's not only scenic, it's providing valuable services to the community.
Now, does this land, do you kind of leave it as it is, or will you incorporate things like trails and kind of activities for the public to use them?
Yeah, so we do have trails on many of our properties. They're pretty much all open to the public, but it may be you're just walking through the woods. There may be no path. So we've
Oh,
got a website and it's got all of our reserves. You click on the little dot and it comes up and tells you how to get there.
great.
So we're encouraging people to use it. So this is a picture of the Niagara Escarpment with all the layers laid down. This is formed 400 million years ago. And there's just literally millions of layers all laid down of these sea creatures and calcium and things over all these sedimentary sediments over the years.
Yeah.
Next one.
I thought I'd keep the pictures because they're so nice.
Yeah, there's a couple of pictures of Mrs. McLeod's property here. This is North Lake, part of North Lake Louise, and the next one. This is part of her wetland, and then there's another picture just coming up with her forest. Oops, I guess not. So these is a little collage of properties that we completed in 2019. And the big project for the year was Willisville Mountain up on the top. So we're just about to buy, and that was 300 acres, cost us $158,000. That was part of the La Cloche Killarney so-called mountain range. So we're just about to buy in about a month another 2,000 acres right next door. So this is a big project for us. But you can see some of the sorts of projects, some of them very small, others bigger, Huron shoreline, for example. Next one.
Beautiful.
So in 2019, I'm a big stats person, you know, 11 new reserves, 1,000 new acres, $3 million of value. And for us, big deal, 3 new species of conservation concern, at that time bringing us to 59. And our ecosystem services grew by another $1 million a year. So I kind of keep track of all these things because I think it's important, but people think I talk too many numbers.
Never can have too much.
So 2020 was a good year, so I didn't get too many pictures in here. We did get 10 new reserves done, another 726 new acres. So that's 3 square kilometers. If you picture that plonked on Hamilton or Toronto, you'll see how big an area that is. And the land we protected was worth over $8 million because we protected one property in particular with a value of $5.9 million to protect 65 acres just at the south end of Caledon.
And can I ask what's the difference? Like what kind of made that property so much more valuable than a lot of the other properties you've been purchasing?
Well, it's the development potential. We sent in our appraiser and he said, well, that 65-acre property is worth $8 million. So if the owner decides to sign an agreement that it's not going to be split up into little bits or dug up as a gravel pit or some such thing, the owner is giving away $5.9 million of that $8 million. So I happily wrote with this very hand right here a tax receipt for $5.9 million. It's kind of a weird feeling.
Yeah, okay, I'll just...
So here's where we are this year. We have completed a new reserve on the Big Head River up near Meaford. And this is where John Muir, the famous environmentalist, the guy that got the American park system started, this is where he lived when he was in Canada in 1865. So that was a really big symbolic deal for us. And just in a couple of weeks now, we should be closing another property up by Lion's Head. So hopefully a month from now, we're closing the 2,000-acre property that I just spoke about up on the La Cloche north of Manitoulin. So 2021 is off to a big start.
That's great.
Yeah, there it is. That's the property I was talking about. It's quite spectacular. It's got 3 mountains on it, you know, through those huge silica things. They're not quite mountains legally, but they're huge. People think of them as mountains. It's got 3 lakes, and it's got a trail that takes 4 days to hike, the length of it. called the Heaven's Gate Trail going through it. So it's been closed while the property's for sale, and we're going to get that back open again, hopefully in a few weeks.
And now I saw on your website, the Heaven's Gate project, you're still kind of campaigning for donations and things, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're just getting the final money together to get that one to go ahead.
That's awesome.
So few people know that there's an international biodiversity agreement whereby 193 countries all got together and agreed to protect 17% of their terrestrial areas by 2020. Canada and Ontario willingly signed on, but lo and behold, they're only at 10%, despite the fact that 2020 is now behind us. And to make it worse, Southern Ontario is at 4.51% because these protected areas are not supposed to be wastelands or something. They're supposed to be the areas where the rare species hang out and people can appreciate nature. At any rate, so Southern Ontario is at 4.5%, which is only half of, it's about a quarter of the 17% target and half of where Canada and Ontario are. But bravely, everybody's moving on. We're going to get 25% protected by 2025, apparently, and 30% by 2030. Now, I don't know how many people have heard of E.O. Wilson, one of my personal heroes, read his books. At any rate, famous ecologist says, we need to get 50% protected if we're going to do a decent job of protecting our species. So that's what we're doing. We are trying to get this land protected, and we've got now 62 of these species of conservation concern on our various reserves. Next one.
How is everyone else kind of who's signed up to this biodiversity agreement? How are other countries faring in terms of meeting that 17%?
Well, I can't give you an accurate reflection, but some countries were already there before they signed on. And
okay.
Some countries are doing remarkably well. And people they're getting there, but there's not a lot of countries that are there already.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I just emphasize that a lot of people think protecting the environment is fighting development. You know, I'm all in favor of fighting Highway 413 and fighting the Duffins Creek development, and I had my hand in there, but mostly we are doing what I call preventative medicine. We're taking the properties out of the hands of developers, and nice people, like people who live in Toronto and Hamilton, I'm sure, want to have a cottage on the side of the lake. And that's what's eating up our environment. So we are stealing land from nice people in Toronto so that we can make nature reserves out of it. Next one. So yeah, as you mentioned, trails, we've been very actively building trails throughout our system, but primarily in Manitoulin. It's because I would love to have something like the Bruce Trail going to end, but it's a slow process up there. Anyways, we've got 12 segments of the Manitoulin Trail built. There are 24, some of them are First Nations and municipal trails, but we have built half of the trail system on Manitoulin.
Oh, awesome. I was also just going to say, Bob, you're doing great for time, so don't feel rushed or anything.
Okay, I was kind of pushing ahead here.
No, you're good. You're good.
So we did a study, and this was, wow, almost 20 years ago we did that study. 10,500 people were using our Cup and Saucer property up in Manitoulin annually. We think now it's up closer to 20,000 people are using it. And we did an economic study. And the economic study said, lo and behold, the economy is better off with conservation land and a hiking trail than houses or lumbering. And I was really pleased to read that there was just an international study that came out. I think it was in The Guardian. The Guardian had a big article about it, and it says exactly the same thing. So, you know, there's this myth that we've got to have lumber mills and cut down all the trees. And, you know, actually the economy is better off with us than a bunch of tree cutting.
Kind of a piece of good news that I feel like I needed to hear recently. That's
Okay, here's just some pictures because I'm going to talk about some of the kinds of land that we've been protecting. So this is the south shore of Manitoulin Island. Just flip through the pictures.
Yeah. Oh, just included a couple.
Yeah, so here we go. So who manages our land? So we feel pretty strongly that nature does a very good job managing its own land, but Leave, Kyo, and Shannon McDonald are working here with us. So just the three of us. We're writing they're writing primarily the eco-sensitivity reports. We've got about 50 stewards helping us, and they're busily right now writing grant applications. We've got almost $1 million of grant applications outstanding right now. And the volunteer stewards watch over the land. And I'll tell you about some of the problems. I think it's on the next slide. Here we go. So a nice lady is suing us for $1 million because she tripped on a fence. So fortunately, our insurance company is helping us with this because it's been hanging around in court for about 3 years. Another landowner cut down 1,400 trees, and he went to his lawyer and told him what a good boy he'd been. And the lawyer just said, you better pay these people and get that thing settled because the agreement says you can't cut down those trees. So he did. He had to pay us $32,000, and he was a pretty unhappy camper. And we do have encroachments. Sometimes we buy a property and there's already an encroachment, but we just had one last fall where a lady bought a cottage and put a cabin on the back, what she thought was the backyard, and it turns out it's on our nature reserve. So ATV traffic is a real problem. And yes, we do have invasive Phragmites and buckthorn and garlic mustard, and the list goes on and on. But we're investing to some degree in solving those problems, but hopefully nature is going to solve a lot of them for us. So let's see, what was the one? Purple loosestrife. They managed that, sort of seemed to settle itself. Everybody was worried about that 10 years ago. So we'll see, but some members of my board encouraged me to spend a lot more time on these invasive species, but I want to get the land out of the hands of the developers. You know, it's a push and pull. What are we going to do here? Next slide. Oh, here we go. This is a picture of our board maybe 10 years ago, and our gentleman that donated some very nice acreage to us on the Niagara Escarpment. So you can see that we're not exactly glamorous. We just get the job done.
What a nice picture.
So we've got 191 reserves today. 90% of them are actually donated to us. And 132 of those 191 are owned by us. So maybe once a year we're buying a property. That's what we're doing with these mountains up north of Manitoulin. But 59 of those 191 are what I call conservation agreements. So this is where the landowner, happy with his land, still farming it, whatever, but they don't want to see it messed up by future generations. A lot of people even worry about their kids, that their kids, as soon as they die, their kids are going to sell it off and just take the money and run. So a lot of people put a conservation agreement, and I'll tell you more about that on the next slide. So the landowner wants to prevent subdivisions, new buildings in areas where they don't want to see buildings, gravel extraction, water extraction, heavy cutting of trees. So we can write up an agreement where the landowner agrees and binds future generations not to do these things. So
is there a time limit on that? Is it indefinitely? Is it kind of, you know, for a certain period of time?
Well, here's the time limit: perpetuity.
Oh, okay.
The registrar in Ontario didn't used to understand that word, but now they do. So these things just keep rolling over every time the land ownership changes. Next one. So then other people want to prevent hunting, pesticides, motorized vehicles, yard lights, cattle in the forest. You know, there's 26 things that people often say they don't want. But people pick and choose, and I say that they are the dictator. They're setting the wording. I just help them write it all down. And for this, they get an income tax receipt. As I mentioned, the $5.9 million tax receipt on an $8 million project that helped this gentleman with his capital gains to an immense degree. So I won't go through all the benefits of the tax receipts, but yes, people do benefit substantially. And a lot of times it's done at the time of intergenerational change, because you own a cottage up north, you're getting into your 70s and 80s, and you discover that it's going to cost you $500,000 in tax to pass your cottage or your recreational property on to your kids. So the kids say, I ain't got $500,000, and the parents don't want to pay the government $500,000. So that's where we step in. We're the great white hero here. We come along and give people a tax receipt for $500,000. So everybody's happy. So I get a little frustrated. People spend so much time working on their garden, you know, and they're buying $100 plants and they're fixing everything up and just going crazy. And we've got this 400 million tree garden outside the city, and sometimes it's kind of hard to raise money for that. You know, if it's beyond your property line, people don't seem to care about it too much, and it's only costing us about $50 an acre to protect a donated property, because we just pay for appraisals and legal fees. So let's say $5,000 protects a $200,000 property, or a $5.9 million property.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about carbon offsets, the meat of the matter here. So, yes, we sequester a whole bunch of carbon dioxide in our $42 million tree, our 42 million trees. We're dealing with voluntary forest credits, so we are not in the regulatory market. So we have to provide something called additionality. So we're selling the fact that we're doing better than the average woodlot owner, because cut wood doesn't last for 100 years. So our trees are going to soak up carbon during their entire lifespan, which could be more like 300 years. So typically people are cutting down trees when they're 60 and 80 years old. So we're doing better than that. And we have sold almost $500,000 worth of offsets, and some to Stephanie and some to Desjardins. So thank you very much, Stephanie. So overall, I kind of have this running calculator. Every month I run to my calculator and figure out how much more carbon we've protected. So far I calculate we've protected 658,000 tons. So that's at the rate of about 5.5 tons per year per acre. And a typical woodlot is maybe 3.25 tons. So what we're selling is the difference, the 2.25. But when you look at the 658,000 tons, I'm talking about all the carbon we're sequestering, not just this extra bit that we're able to sell. So yes, we do sell that additional carbon over and above a normal woodlot. And sometimes people have trouble visualizing what's happening to that carbon. Trees, the leaves fall down, the leaf litter goes into the ground, trees build roots. When the tree rots away, the roots are still there. They're building cell carbon. So the science is that it is helping the earth to be protecting these trees. Next one. So I'm just emphasizing that our carbon work there is worth, in Southern Ontario, carbon sequestration is worth something like $1.5 billion a year. But nature is doing a lot more than climate regulatory services. The aesthetic values, like people pay to look at nature, tourists come here, people go out just for a drive to look at the leaves. That's worth over $27 billion a year. And a water supply, $25 billion a year, because our forests and wetlands are improving the water. Recreational services, hiking, the kinds of things I did when I was a little younger, and $9 billion of water quality and waste regulation. So there's a lot of value in what nature is doing. And this comes from a government study, by the way. There's a lot of value in what nature is doing, and the climate carbon services are just a very small fraction of that. Next one. Yeah, here you go. That little sliver that's missing is the fraction of our work that is carbon. The other blue part is all the other ecological services that we're providing. Next one. So how do we actually do this carbon process? First of all, we do a feasibility study, and the professional team looks at our properties and what we could likely do. They look at the standards and protocols, and they look at the market demand. So they write a report that says, yes, it's feasible for you to be doing carbon. And I should say that I tried twice. We tried to do it ourselves 10 years ago, and I just couldn't sell it. People didn't understand. I'd send letters, companies didn't have a clue what I was talking about. Then I tried with another company, and that didn't work. So this is the third try, and it's working, fortunately. So first is a feasibility study. Second is the actual evaluation. We go out, and I'll tell you in a second how we measure the woodlot. And then the third step is verification. So this process doesn't come cheap. We've spent $30,000 or $40,000 twice now, and that doesn't even include our labor, to get all this measurement done so that we can experience the revenue that's coming in, which is something over $100,000 a year for carbon. Next one. Yeah, so we talked about this, the 3.17 tons of carbon in a typical forest that's being harvested, but we're up at the 5.24 level. So we call it improved forestry. There is a protocol, and we just let the trees grow to maturity. Next one. So here are the standards and carbon sinks and all the techie stuff, but we do have to agree that our trees are going to be protected for 100 years. So it's not something you can do if you're a person, because a person isn't going to live that long. And this improved forestry is what we're talking. This is the name of the protocol that we're using. So this is where we leave our trees. We don't do any harvest at all. And I think the next slide has a little thing. Yeah. So a normal forest, let's call it the dark yellow section in the bottom. The forestry bylaw prevents you from just cutting down all your trees. But the yellow there is a normal harvest that people are taking off to the mill. But even in the 3.17, there are some companies that are doing a reduced cut. So they are taking out a little bit of wood, but they can still sell some improved forestry. But I just emphasize ours, the dark green, we're not doing any cutting whatsoever. So we're getting credit for the dark green and the light green. So let's just talk about what happens to trees when they're cut on the next slide. Oh, sorry. First, let's talk about how we measure it. So we go out, and last year we did this in the snow. Well, a year and a half ago, we did it in the snow. And we try to sample about 20% of our reserves. So the way you do this is you go out to the center point, you try to pick a typical place in the forest. You take all the trees within a 10-meter radius, you measure the distance to each tree, the diameter of the tree, the species of the tree, and the angle from the center to the top, so they can get an idea how tall the tree is. And then we show that plot on a map with the area that it would be typical of that forest. So then we send that off to our evaluators, and they put it in the fancy model. So they have to subtract the business as usual forest, the normal forestry. They have to subtract leakage from ours because there could be fires or disease. And they have to subtract some uncertainty. So then they come up with the probable amount of new carbon that we have to sell on the market. Next one. So, yeah, I think we pretty much covered all this, but I'd like to say that our offsets, we don't just put them out there. We have to register them with the Canadian Standards Association, and then the Canadian Standards Association puts them on their register, and when we sell them, they take them back off again, so we can't sell them twice. Next slide.
When people buy offsets, they don't purchase them directly from EBC. They purchase them from Carbon Zero, and then that gets linked.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I thought it would be interesting to put this slide in because it shows how much carbon is stored in a tree. So across the top, you've got the age of the tree, 20 to 125 years. And then you've got the tree varieties. So let's take an oak down at the bottom. A 20-year-old oak tree has 20 tons of carbon per hectare. So if you've got a hectare of oak trees normally spaced, you've got about 70 tons in there. But if you extend it, you leave those trees happily growing in the forest, at age 125, you've got 274 tons of carbon in that oak forest. So these trees really are continuing to grow. There's a myth among foresters that once a tree reaches about 60, it doesn't add any girth. Well, that's just not true. This study is proving that.
So what kind of trees do you specifically plant at EBC? Are you mandated through the CSA to plant a specific type of tree?
We don't really plant trees. If people want to plant trees on our properties, I have trouble finding leftover little bits that aren't already forested. So yes, we planted a few trees, 100 here, 100 there, but mostly we're buying forest and just keeping it in its mature state. You know, sometimes we'll get a plantation or something with 40-year-old pine trees, but mostly we're just buying forest because it's important to protect old forest.
Gotcha.
Now, the next question is, all of the forestry schools used to teach people that it's better to take the trees and take them out and let new trees grow in their stead. But and meanwhile, you're keeping an active forest industry going. But let's look what happens to the fiber. Look 10 years out, cut trees are still in use. 35% of cut trees are still in use after 10 years, but 31% of them have gone to landfill and more to energy and more to emissions. But if you go to 110 years, how many trees are still in use? 15% of that wood is in studs in buildings or in furniture that's still being used. All the rest of it's been torn down, sent off to the landfill. I walk along Bloor Street every night and all this furniture's out there and all this IKEA shelving and everything. It's all going out to the dump. And I think I'm going to emphasize it in a future slide that 25% of the cut wood in Ontario goes to toilet paper. Well, that just goes straight down the toilet. Does not have a long lifespan. Next one. Oh, there you go. This is where it says only 15% of harvested wood lasts for 100 years. 25% of it goes into the toilet. And yes, some of it to the slash returns to CO2. So these old trees are doing a much better job than young trees. Next one. Okay, so this creating nature reserves isn't something the specialists have to do. We need people's help to talk to their friends about protecting natural areas, How many of our friends have a farm in the country and this kind of thing? Those are properties we work with. And yes, we do work with farmland. And people have the opportunity to offset capital gains. Like, this isn't some mysterious thing. When there's a generational change, you got to pay capital gains. Well, talk to us. We can help you. People can offset your carbon use. If you buy carbon offsets, we use the money to go out and buy new land. And green investments are a good thing. And I haven't emphasized it in this but if people make sustainable investments, but then they buy carbon offsets and things from us, their portfolio is getting even greener, because if people donate securities to us that have gained value, then they're saving money and doing green things. So we can be part of people's investment portfolio. Next thing. There you go. That's the last slide, because we think it's important and we're pretty keen on it. So love to get more comments back on what everybody else thinks.
Just put up your information just for everyone. They would like to get in contact.
Yeah. Good. Love to get calls and suggestions. Good.
Yes. Okay, great.
Okay. Stephanie, your turn.
Perfect. Okay. I will bring it up. Thank you so much, Bob. That was wonderful. That
was great. So are we still, yeah, we are still recording.
Yes. Yes.
So when we purchase carbon offsets through Carbon Zero, and then Carbon Zero turns around and gives you probably a large portion of that money for you, and then you generally use it to purchase more land, or what do you do with that money that we give through carbon offsets? Okay,
so you have asked a very good question. We try to keep our admin and whatever costs as low as possible. I just mentioned we got 3 staff for 192 nature reserves. So we're not spending much money on staff. Just about everything we spend money on is buying land. So I'm trying to remember the numbers, but we'll spend $100,000 a year accepting donations. So that will that pays the legal fees and the appraisal costs of getting new land in the door, where the landowner's just donating the land to us. So that's a pretty good investment. $1 in there is bringing $50 worth of land or something. But then, yes, every now and then we go out, and right now we're raising about $1.7 million to buy 2,000 acres north of Manitoulin. So that specifically, we took $50,000 of carbon revenue and put it towards that $1.7 million project.
Very good.
Yeah. And so, go ahead, Stephanie.
One last question. So it sounds like you've measured what that difference is between the old growth forests and the wood lots in terms of the carbon, and that's what you can sell. So do you still have room to keep selling offsets? And then I assume when you buy more land, then theoretically you can do another assessment and keep growing that number that you can sell as offsets, right? Is that the idea?
Yeah, so every year that we own the land, we can sell the offsets. So 2021, we'll have another whole round of offsets to sell. And as we add to that base, the property up in the 2,000 acre property is going to generate something like $30,000 a year of new carbon revenue based on that acreage of trees. I haven't done the measurements yet, but just a quick estimate tells me that it's a substantial source of ongoing revenue. And then we take that money and put it into protecting more land. So
neat. Thank you.
Yeah. One question I had for you, Bob, was you mentioned that, you had pitched this idea of offsets 10 years ago and it didn't really get any uptake. Is there, in your mind, like a reason behind why that has, that's kind of transformed and kind of get the go ahead? Is it, is it more awareness about climate change, more interest in action? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I spent $30,000 on a marketing consultant who I thought explained all this very well. And we wrote to the 1,000 largest companies in Canada explaining that we'd like to get them involved in our carbon offset program. And I maybe got a dozen letters back, and most of them said, no, we've already done our donating this year. They didn't understand it's not a donation, it's helping them. So that all came to naught. I don't think I ever sold any carbon offsets. So remind me the second half of your question.
No, I was just wondering if there was, you know, a more keen interest in climate change in general, or more action or interest in action for climate change that has worked to allow you to say, you know, these offset work, you're starting to kind of get a market for them.
Yeah, I think people and companies are getting much more aware of carbon as part of our environment. You know, all these environmentally friendly investments, and there's a lot more sense that that's fitting into the economy today than it used to be. But we were never able to capitalize on that, and fortunately Carbon Zero got talking to some of the big banks and financial institutions. They had contacts that we didn't have, and they've got it explained and making it work for people in ways that we couldn't do on our own. I'll just say that we would be very keen to get into the regulatory market, but it's going to be a tough slog, I think, because I'm not sure that the government is going to include this kind of offset in the regulatory market. I'm not sure why not, but they're very keen on planting 2 billion trees. Where they're going to find the room for that, I'm not sure. Where they're going to find the labor for that, I'm not sure. But young trees, it's going to take those trees a long time before they're doing anything. And I'm not always sure that they have the capacity to protect those trees in the long term. I just saw one presentation on that kind of a program just in the last Zoom call I was on within the last hour. And they were talking about growing the trees for 40 or 60 years and then cutting them all down and sending them off to the mill. So I'm not sure that these big tree planting projects are really focused on the right things. I think we should be focusing more on protecting our existing forests from poor forestry and bad uses of wood.
Mm-hmm. And then the last question I have is what kind of volunteer opportunities do people involved with the Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy do? What kind of activities are they able to participate in?
Okay, well, I'm pleased to tell you that a young woman just contacted me the other day from Sir Sanford, and she's going to come and help us for a couple of weeks in April. So staff here are very excited that they're going to get some field work, and we'll do some things with that. But we do need help here, and a number of people have volunteered and ultimately become staff. Mostly we need help with monitoring our properties. So just that's 1, 2, 3 times a year, maybe go out and look at the properties to make sure that everything's fine. There's not a lot of ATV traffic. The cows aren't eating our young trees, etc. And the other thing is building trail. We think it would be better if we had more trails and better trails. So building trail and watching over our properties in the area where people live would be very helpful.
Great.
And doing species inventories and things like that, because the more I can identify rare species, the more I can explain to people what we're doing.
Awesome. Stephanie, did you have any final questions for Bob?
No, I didn't. That was great. I learned so much by listening to your talk. So yeah, thank you.
No, I know this was great. I just loved it. So yeah, Bob, thank you so much for your time. You have such a wealth of knowledge and so much experience in this. And then a huge thank you to Stephanie for, you know, supporting local offsets and that being so important to you for your climate change plan. It's just